Welcome, weary traveler of thoughts, to a place where time drifts slowly, like sand through a quiet hourglass, and memory rests gently in the corners of a peaceful room. You have found your way to yet another installment of Boring History for Sleep, Forgotten Tales of Christianity in Medieval Europe. Tonight, we begin a long and uneventful journey, a tale with no heroes and no climaxes, a story stretched across centuries, where things happen slowly, if they happen at all. Here, history is not loud or urgent, it is gentle, hesitant, and a little forgotten. What follows is not a tale of conquest or glory. It is a story of flickering candles, nameless monks, and soft-spoken prayers. You are not meant to remember all of it. You are simply meant to drift with it, as you would with a slow stream under a pale moon. But before we begin, let us pause, let us breathe. The time we visit moves at its own pace. After the fall of the Roman Empire, though some say it never quite fell, only staggered, there were quiet years. Not silent, exactly, but muffled. Christianity, once the faith of persecuted outcasts, had survived, and now it lingered in corners, whispering its way into forgotten provinces and sleepy villages, carried not by warriors, but by weary feet. In these years, the church was not yet a grand institution. It was a patchwork of customs and prayers, overseen by bishops whose names are mostly unknown. They met occasionally, in drafty halls, to discuss matters of great subtlety, the nature of Christ, the position of Easter, the shape of a monk's haircut. Some say these debates mattered, others forgot entirely. Either way, decisions were made in, then remade over decades. Let's take a small detour to the deserts of Egypt. Here, men wandered alone, not to escape the world, but to escape noise. These hermits spoke little, ate less, and prayed endlessly. Some claimed visions, others claimed nothing. One slept on a rock for 40 years, another lived in a barrel. Their stories traveled slowly across seas, changing shape with every telling, until they arrived in Europe like fragile leaves on the wind. In Gaul, now roughly France, bishops convened to decide things. Councils, they were called like the Council of Arles, or perhaps of Orange. Their conclusions were long-winded and sometimes forgotten before they could be copied. Yet still they met, and still they spoke, because it was expected. The faith grew not through certainty, but through repetition. The same prayers said every morning, even if no one quite knew why. Elsewhere, saints began to appear not in a blaze of miracles, but in gentle local legends. There was Saint Genesius, a Roman actor who died mid-performance, and Saint Cuthbert, who preferred the company of birds. Their relics were bones, or teeth, or fragments of cloaks, carefully placed in boxes and paraded on certain days. Some say they performed wonders, others say the boxes were simply heavy, and no one wanted to question them. Far to the west, on mist-covered isles, Christianity drifted into Ireland and Britain. It did not come with armies, but with stories. Monks crossed the sea in small round boats called curraghs. They brought no plans, only parchment and habit. On the island of Yawner, they built a small chapel and began to copy books, not quickly, but carefully. Every page a meditation, every mistake a moment for prayer. The Book of Kells, perhaps the most famous of these efforts, was not made to be read quickly. It was a visual hymn, filled with swirling letters and curious animals. Cats curled around the margins, angels looked bored. Some say the monks doodled while they waited for inspiration. Others believe the inspiration was the doodling. Either way, the book remains, long after its creators have faded into name. Let's pause again, to consider the churches of this time. Many were not made of stone, but of wood and straw. Roofs leaked, walls leaned, wind crept in during Mass, but the people came anyway, because the ritual mattered more than the structure. A simple altar, a flickering lamp, a priest with a misshapen nose. These were enough. In some regions, the Mass was sung in Latin. in others, in a local tongue, or a mix of both. Sometimes the words were mispronounced, sometimes misunderstood, but always, they were spoken. Because to speak them was to remember something even if what was remembered had already been forgotten. Among the clergy, some were pious, others were sleepy. A few drank too much wine, but still rang the bells. They copied texts when they could, though many of them copied copies of copies. Over time, entire libraries were made up of books no one had read, because the act of preserving was more sacred than the contents preserved. Let's take another small detour, this time to the town of Tours, where a man named Martin became a bishop. He did not want to be one. In fact, he hid in a barn to avoid ordination, but the geese inside made such a racket that he was discovered. Even today, some still eat goose on St. Martin's Day, not to honor him, but to remember the birds who betrayed him. As the centuries drifted onward, the church grew roots, some deeper than others. Monasteries were founded, rules were written. The rule of St. Benedict, with its quiet focus on obedience, silence and daily labor, became popular, not everywhere, but in enough places that it lingered. Monks rose before dawn, they sang psalms in cold chapels, they tended gardens, and never hurried. Meanwhile, the average villager knew little of these developments. They knew that bread rose best on warm days, that the saints liked candles, and that bad dreams meant you had forgotten to pray. Their Christianity was woven into seasons, songs, and the cycle of the fields. A quiet faith, without questions, without declarations. Somewhere around this time, relics became more elaborate. Pieces of the true cross multiplied. Thorns were claimed. So were nails. Enough, some joked, to build a second crucifix. But no one questioned too deeply. Faith was not about counting, it was about feeling. And feelings did not require accuracy. Let's pause one final time. Imagine a village priest, balding, tired, and half-blind reading a homily he had read every Sunday for 20 years. His voice droning just above a whisper. A child asleep in the back pew. A dog scratching at the door. Dust caught in a beam of light. Outside, nothing changed. Inside, nothing needed to. So we end this first part not with a conclusion, but with a sigh. The early church in medieval Europe was not a blaze of drama, but a slow, steady ember. It flickered, it warmed, it never rushed, it asked for patience, and now so do we. Let us continue, though gently and without urgency. The centuries ahead did not burst open, they unfolded, like parchment left in the sun. The church was growing, but not quickly. Ideas drifted from place to place, carried by monks with tired feet and scrolls, too fragile to unfold in the wind. And so, slowly, the work of shaping belief began, not in grand cathedrals, but in candlelit corners, by those who argued quietly. There were synod small gatherings of bishops with furrowed brows and heavy robes. Some were held in wooden halls that creaked when anyone stood. At these meetings, matters were discussed that few outside the room would understand. Was Christ equal to the Father? Did the Holy Spirit proceed from both Father and Son? Some say these debates changed the world. Others say they mostly changed the mood in the room. Let's take a small detour to the Council of Toledo. Or was it Nicaea? Perhaps Chalcedon. The names blur after a while. In one, they debated nature human and divine. In another, they debated calendars. The goal was clarity, but what followed was centuries of confusion. Doctrines were written in Latin, then misread in Greek, then translated back again with missing verbs. And yet, people believed if not in the words, then in the rhythm of them. In Ireland, scribes sat hunched over vellum, copying letters with painful precision. Their pens made small scratching sounds in rooms so silent, you could hear someone thinking, the Book of Armagh, the Book of Dura, beautiful names for books that took years to complete. The monks who made them did not hurry. There was time, there was always time. And if they ran out of parchment, they simply prayed for more sheep. The doctrine of the Trinity puzzled even the most determined thinkers. 3 in 1, 1 in 3. It was explained in sermons, though few understood. Some compared it to water, ice, liquid, steam. Others to the sunlight, heat, and glow. Each comparison raised new questions, but no one was expected to solve them, only to accept them and nod slowly, as though understanding came from the act of listening itself. Let's pause here and remember Pelagius, a monk or a heretic, depending on whom you ask. He believed people could choose goodness. Others disagreed. They said grace was necessary. This became an argument, then a council, then a doctrine. Pelagius faded into exile, perhaps to Egypt, perhaps to nowhere. The church moved on, but the idea lingered, like a breeze in a quiet chapel. Some doctrines concern sin, original sin, to be precise. Whether babies were born guilty, whether unbaptized infants were lost forever. These were not questions with quick answers. They were pondered across decades. Augustine of Hippo, a thinker with a heavy heart, wrote long letters on the subject. His words were copied slowly, and read even more slowly. Some agreed, some blinked, unsure what they had just read. The East and West began to drift apart, like two boats on the same river, slowly rowing in different directions. One favored leavened bread, the other preferred unleavened. One crossed themselves from left to right, the other, right to left. There were other differences, but these were the most visible. And when questioned, the answers were always the same. This is how we've always done it. Let's take a moment to visit Whitby, a quiet meeting in a quiet place. Here, Irish monks met Roman ones and discussed the shape of a monk's haircut. The Irish shaved the front, the Romans shaved the crown. The debate was long. In the end, the Roman style was chosen not because it made more sense, but because it matched the bishop's preference. The Irish monks shrugged and kept chanting. In Spain, a doctrine emerged called the filioque, with the idea that the Holy Spirit proceeded from the Father and the Son. It was a small phrase, but caused centuries of tension. Some added the words to creeds, others removed them. Scrolls were edited, tempers rose slowly. No one shouted, but everyone frowned. Across the Carolingian Empire, charters were written. Land was granted to monasteries with clauses so detailed, they required a second document to explain them. To the brothers of Saint Whatever, for the care of 3 goats, 1 orchard, and use of the east-facing hillock during dry months only. The monks received the gift, then buried the charter beneath other charters. Some say theology was like weaving threads of belief, pulled tight across looms of parchment. Others say it was more like focal ways there, but hard to hold. Either way, it continued. Books were written, some were read. Most were placed on shelves too high to reach. Occasionally someone climbed up, fell down, and decided it wasn't worth it. Let's take a small detour into the world of glosses. These were notes written in the margins of holy texts. A monk might write, "This part is unclear," or ask Brother Alaric what this means. Sometimes, the glosses were longer than the scripture. In one case, a monk corrected himself halfway through the correction. No one minded, the parchment was reused anyway. Meanwhile, in Italy, a man named Boethius tried to reconcile philosophy and faith. He wrote The Consolation of Philosophy while in prison. It was less a cry for help and more a murmur of thought. He asked whether fortune mattered, whether God was time-bound, whether good men suffer by design. His answers were slow. So slow, in fact, that most readers never reached the end. Doctrinal clarity did not come quickly. It came in layers, some added, some removed. Councils gathered again and again. New terms were coined, homoousios, consubstantial, incarnate. Each term brought comfort to some, confusion to others. The faithful meanwhile kept attending Mass, lighting candles, and wondering quietly if they were doing it right. In the Byzantine world, icons became a point of concern. Should images of Christ be allowed? Were they holy or idolatrous? Iconoclasts said no, others said yes. There were councils, then more councils. Icons were broken, then restored. The people kept praying either way. The paintings watched in silence as paint flaked off over time. Let us pause here, not to conclude, but to rest. The dust of doctrine still hangs in the air. It does not settle easily, but it does settle eventually, and somewhere, in a scriptorium that no longer stands, a monk dips his pen in ink, made from oak galls, and whispers a prayer before he begins another slow line. We will continue soon, though not too soon. There are relics to carry, saints to misremember, and shrines to build, one stone at a time. Let us drift onward now, not forward, but gently sideways. The great debates of doctrine grew quieter for a while. The voices that once filled councils faded into softer echoes, like bells heard from across a valley. In their place came stories, not from scholars or emperors, but from travelers, pilgrims, and monks. Tales passed down through breath, not parchment, and in these stories, history slowed further still. This was the age of hermits and saints, though not the ones with golden halos or marble statues. These were saints you may not have heard of, and if you did, you likely forgot. They lived in caves or beside rivers, or near the edge of forgotten forests. Their miracles were small or uncertain. A cow that gave milk in winter, a candle that didn't go out, a bird that bowed during prayers. Things not proven, but repeated. Let's take a small detour to a hill in what is now Belgium. There, a woman named Gadula lit her lamp before dawn, walking to church each morning through fog and bramble. One day the devil is said to have blown it out. She relit it calmly. He blew again. She relit it again. This went on for some time. Eventually the devil gave up, and Gadula kept walking. Some say she became a saint. Others say she simply enjoyed her walks. Relics began to appear in greater numbers. Some were bones, though of whom no one was entirely sure. Others were pieces of cloth, vials of oil, splinters of wood. One church claimed to have the hair of John the Baptist, another, his tooth, a third, his entire head. None of them matched, but no one complained. Pilgrims came, they lit candles, they whispered hopes, and then they went home. Shrines appeared along paths that were not official. Some were built near wells, others beneath leaning trees. Often a local shepherd had seen a vision, or perhaps just a strange light. A bishop might investigate, or might not. Either way, a chapel would be built. Stones stacked slowly, a bell hung, a priest assigned, and life would continue. Let us pause in the silence of a monastery garden. Here, a monk tends herbs, lavender, sage, perhaps rosemary. He moves slowly, murmuring psalms to the soil. He does not speak often, unless to the plants. Nearby, another monk copies a text by hand. He scratches his head, unsure whether the word is spirit or sparrow. He chooses sparrow. The text becomes legend. The saints of this era were local, and their stories changed from town to town. One village swore that Saint Baldric once turned rain into wine. Another insisted he made wolves polite. No one argued. There was room for both. In a world that rarely changed, a good story was worth keeping, even if it contradicted the last one. Let's take another detour, this time to a chapel carved into the side of a cliff. No one knows who carved it. Perhaps it was a mason fleeing taxes. Perhaps a monk seeking solitude. Inside, the walls are rough, but hold old paintings. One shows a saint riding a fish, another, a demon in a tree. The paint has faded, but the quiet has remained. Pilgrims walked long distances, sometimes for penance, sometimes for healing, sometimes because they had nothing else to do. They followed worn paths, marked by stones and stories. At each stop, they might leave an offering, a coin, a thread, a broken shoe. The shrines did not ask much, only patience, and feet willing to keep moving. The bones of saints were carried from town to town, not quickly, usually by ox cart, sometimes by accident. There is a story of a donkey who refused to move until a saint's remains were brought inside the church. The people took this as a sign. A church was built on that very spot. Later, the donkey was canonized, unofficially, by a local farmer. Let us pause to consider holy water. It was stored in stone basins, sometimes shaped like seashells. Pilgrims would dip their fingers, then cross themselves. Some said it healed, others said it stung. One monk accidentally spilled a barrel of it and apologized for a week. No one was angry. The floor was blessed for months afterward. In the countryside, Christianity blended gently with older beliefs. Trees were still sacred, stones still whispered. When churches were built, they were often placed where people were already gathering on hills, near springs, beside ancient oaks. The clergy did not remove the old stories. They folded them in. A saint replaced a spirit. A hymn echoed an older chant. Let's take a moment to remember Saint Fructuosus. He lived in Spain and founded monasteries so remote that even maps forgot them. He once predicted a flood that never came, but the people thanked him anyway. Perhaps it was his prayer that kept the waters away, or perhaps there was no flood to begin with. Either way, a feast day was established. In these centuries, belief was not uniform. It was regional, seasonal, personal. Some villages prayed to a saint for rain, others for less rain. Sometimes the saints overlapped. Sometimes they disagreed, but the people did not mind. They knew that heaven had many voices, and some spoke more clearly in certain dialects. Let's take another small detour into the life of a scribe in a tiny abbey. He has been working on the same page for 3 weeks, a single psalm, illuminated with blue and gold. His fingers ache, his ink has dried. Still, he continues, because the psalm is not finished, and neither is the day. In Germany, a woman named Hildegard began to write visions. She saw colors in the sky, heard music in silence. She described it all in long, winding prose. Some thought her mad, others thought her inspired. Her writings were copied. Slowly, some of them still survive. Others were tucked into drawers and never read again. Meanwhile, life went on. People were born. They tilled soil. They lit candles on feast days. They baked bread marked with crosses. They listened to sermons that repeated the same 3 points, sometimes in Latin, sometimes in local tongues, sometimes not at all. Silence was also a kind of liturgy. Let us pause one last time, here in this quiet, the long quiet, the centuries where faith was not a march, but a hum, not a declaration, but a murmur, the kind of faith that sits beside you, rather than leading you, the kind that lingers long after the story ends. We will continue, in time. There are still churches to build, monks to write, and saints yet to be forgotten. But first, let the quiet settle again, like dust on a windowsill. Let us continue, not with fanfare, but with mist. The centuries we now wander into are filled with stone. Stone carved, stacked, lifted slowly. Stone that became churches not overnight, but over lifetimes. Some were planned, some improvised. Some began with a vision, others with a draft that no one followed. But all of them stood, eventually, beneath the same sky, and the same clouds drifting like forgotten thoughts. In small towns and hilltop villages, churches began to rise. Not all at once, and not with grandeur. First came the chapel, 4 walls, a wooden cross, a single bell. Later the walls were rebuilt in stone. A tower was added. Windows shaped like leaves or spears. The work often took decades, sometimes longer. A mason would carve the base of a pillar, and his grandson might finish the top. Let's take a small detour to a village in Normandy, where fog settles every morning like a memory. Here, a church was begun in 1021. It was finished in 1079. The original builder died, so did his son. The villagers say a mule once refused to carry stones on the Sabbath, and so construction paused for 7 years. Whether true or not, the gap is recorded in the stone itself, an uneven row of bricks, slightly darker than the rest. Inside these churches, stories took form not in books, but in images, stained glass that flickered with sun, carvings above doorways, angels with soft faces, demons with goat legs, a man being swallowed by a fish, a woman riding a lion. Their meanings were not always clear, but clarity was not required. The stories were reminders, not instructions. Let's pause in the nave of an unfinished cathedral. The scaffolding creaks, dust hangs in the beams of light. A painter is working on the ceiling, depicting the Last Judgment. His brush moves slowly. He does not rush. He knows he will not live to see the painting finished, but he paints anyway, because the work, like faith, continues even when it is incomplete. In England, a church was built in the shape of a cross. The builders said it would honor St. Alban, but midway through construction, they ran out of funds. The cross became more of a crooked L still. Mass was held. A child was baptized. A monk lit candles and mumbled prayers, and the shape of the church no longer mattered. The fog rolled in often during this time, not metaphorically. Real fog, thick, quiet, cool. It wrapped itself around stone towers. It softened footsteps. It made voices echo. A villager approaching the chapel could see only the bell tower, floating like a ghost above the ground. Inside, the candles flickered, and someone sang off-key, but with feeling. Let's take another small detour to a field where a small church collapsed one winter. The roof gave in under the weight of snow. The people met anyway, standing in a circle where the altar used to be. They prayed louder to make up for the missing walls. A new church was built a few years later, just beside the ruins. The ruins were left alone because they still felt holy. In these churches, relics rested beneath the altar. Small bones, bits of fabric, glass beads that might have belonged to a martyr, or perhaps not. The labels had faded. One said simply, "Saint of somewhere." The faithful knelt just the same, because the relic was not a proof, it was a presence. There were stories passed from one monk to another, of animals who refused to enter the churchyard unless they were blessed, of candles that refused to burn during untruthful sermons, of bells that rang themselves when no one was near. These were not official miracles. They were local, lingering, quietly believed, and gently shared. Let's pause to consider a church bell, cast from melted tools, hung from oak beams, rung at sunrise, and again at sunset. It called people not just to prayer, but to rhythm, to structure, to familiarity. When the bell cracked, a blacksmith recast it with a sliver of silver added just in case it made the sound holier. In some towns, the church was also the clock, not a mechanical one, but a human one. The sexton rang the bell 7 times for morning prayers, once for midday, and slowly again at dusk. Time passed not in numbers, but in tones. The people listened, not to hours, but to echoes. Let's take a moment to visit a church on a cliffside, facing the sea. The waves crashed below, but the chapel remained still. Fishermen lit candles before sailing. When storms came, the priest rang the bell twice, then waited. If the boats returned, he rang it again. If not, he lit candles and read psalms until dawn. No one kept track of how often this happened. Some churches were painted, inside and out, saints with gold halos, clouds shaped like scrolls, eyes too large, hands too thin. Over time, the colors faded. Rain leaked through the roof, moss crept up the walls, but even then, the paintings remained, faint, weathered, like old memories that no longer asked to be understood, only noticed. Let us pause again and think of a pew, wooden, rough, polished only by centuries of sitting. It creaks when you shift your weight. It holds no carvings, no inscriptions, but hundreds have sat here, wept here, dozed off during long homilies. The pew has seen more prayers than most saints, and still, it waits without complaint. In southern Italy, a church was built with no windows. Some say it was for security. Others say it was a mistake. Either way, Mass was held by candlelight for 200 years. The priest memorized every word. The congregation listened carefully, though no one could see his face. It was said that faith is sometimes strongest in the dark. Let's take one final detour to a carpenter who was asked to build a new altar. He took 3 weeks to choose the right wood. He carved it with care, then started over, because the grain reminded him of something he couldn't quite name. The final altar was plain, but the priest said it made the prayers sound better. No one argued. The churches of this age were not just buildings, they were pauses, spaces where time slowed, where the wind echoed differently, where footsteps softened. Some have collapsed, some stand still, but all of them were built slowly, stone by stone, thought, by people who did not rush. Let us rest here, among the stones. We are not finished, but we are in no hurry. There are still monks to meet, manuscripts to miscopy, and margins to fill with doodles. But first, let the silence of the stone speak, softly, to the quiet within you. Let us return now, not to a battlefield, but to a bench. A wooden bench in a quiet room. The room smells of ink, wax, and wool. A monk sits there, hunched, writing. He has been writing since sunrise. He will continue past sunset. What he copies is not urgent. It is a psalm, or perhaps a letter from a bishop long dead. The words are not his, but the rhythm of them has become his own. Monasteries were the libraries of their age, but not loud libraries, filled with questions and voices. These were silent places, built with thick walls and small windows. The light came in gently, the air moved slowly. Time inside seemed to pause. Outside seasons changed. Inside only the ink moved, slowly, carefully, line by line. Let's take a small detour to a scriptorium in the north of France. Their brother Matthew is tasked with copying the rule of Saint Benedict. He does not question it. He does not rush it. He dips his quill in ink made from oak galls and iron salts. He steadies his hand. He writes the same sentence 3 times before it feels correct. His progress is slow, but no one expects speed, only care. In another monastery, farther east, a young scribe has just finished the first letter of a new page. It is enormous, illuminated, decorated with gold leaf and twisting vines. A dragon peers from behind the curves of the letter. The letter itself is an A. It will take him another week to finish the word Amen. But that is enough. In the monastery, progress is not measured by length but by devotion. Let's pause here and imagine the library. It is not large, just a single room. Shelves line the walls. Scrolls and codices rest on worn wooden boards. Each book has been copied by hand. Some of them are chained to the shelves, not because they are rare, but because they are heavy. Dust floats in the air like memory. The silence is thick, almost physical. The texts include scripture, of course, but also herbal guides, calendars of saints, lists of sins, carefully categorized. Some books are filled with commentary, not just on theology, but on grammar. A note in the margin reads, "Do not trust Brother Gerhard's spelling." Another says, "Copied during the Great Cold." Hands nearly useless. The book itself does not mind. It is complete. Some manuscripts are in Latin, others in Greek, a few in Old Church, Slavonic, but most are in local dialects, half understood. Language was less fixed in those days. A word could mean three things, or nothing at all. The monks wrote what they heard, or what they thought they heard. Truth in that time often wore soft edges. Let's take another small detour to the margins. Not the center of the page, but the edges. Here, the scribes allowed themselves a little mischief. A cat chasing a bishop, a monkey playing a harp, a knight fighting a snail. No one knows why. Some say it was boredom, others say it was joy. Either way, the margins became their own kind of gospel. In Ireland, the monks wrote prayers in between lines of poetry, and poetry between lines of prayers. One line reads, "Today I wrote 3 verses, and saw a fox in the field. The fox did not look at me." Another says, "Snow has come. I cannot feel my feet, but the letters still come." The quiet beauty of these notes lingers, long after the ink has faded. Books were not just made, they were born, from sheep and ink and breath. A manuscript could take years, and even then it might sit unread for centuries. But that did not matter. The making was enough. The book itself was a prayer, even if no one heard it spoken aloud. Let us pause beside a shelf. One book is larger than the others, bound in dark leather. Inside is a collection of sermons by a man whose name no one can now pronounce. The handwriting changes halfway through. Perhaps the original scribe died. Perhaps another took over. The transition is awkward, but the book continues. That too is part of its story. In some monasteries, books were read aloud very slowly to very sleepy audiences. A lector would stand near the fire and read while the monks ate their simple meals: lentils, bread, water. If the reader mumbled, no one corrected him. If he paused too long, someone might snore. But the reading went on, because the words, even if unheard, still mattered. Let's take a small detour to a tale told in one manuscript. It tells of a monk who once tried to translate a passage of scripture, and instead produced a recipe for eel stew. No one noticed for 3 generations. When it was discovered, the recipe was recopied, just in case. The monks agreed it was too well written to discard. Illuminated manuscripts were treasured not just for their content, but for their beauty. Gold leaf was applied with breath and brush. Blue ink came from lapis lazuli, shipped from far-off mines. A single letter might cost more than a year's harvest, and yet it would be used to write a single word: peace, or light, or God. No one considered this wasteful. Beauty was a form of belief. Over time, some monasteries became known for their scriptoria: Lindisfarne, Cluny, Monte Cassino. Their works traveled slowly, by hand, by horse, by ship. When a book arrived in a distant abbey, it was greeted like a guest, placed on a table, opened slowly, read with reverence. Not for what it said, but because it had been made. Let's pause and think of a candle. A single candle, flickering beside a tired monk's hand. The wax drips onto the table. The flame shifts with his breath. He has just 1 paragraph left, but his eyes are heavy. He finishes the last line with a smudge, and writes, in the margin, "Sleep 1 today." The book survives. So does the smudge. The manuscripts held more than theology. They preserved recipes, remedies, maps of stars, lists of birds, directions to places that no longer exist. One page describes a tree that sings hymns at sunrise. Another claims that angels can be heard in certain caves. Whether true or not, the monks copied it all. Because truth was not always about fact. Sometimes, it was about wonder. Let us rest here, among the pages. The ink may have faded, but the care has not. The work of the monks was not fast, it was not efficient, but it was sincere. And that sincerity still whispers, if you listen slowly enough. Soon, we will wander again, toward pilgrim paths, carved stone, and old prayers. But for now, let us remain with the manuscripts and the monks who gave them breath. Let us step softly now into the slow rhythm of walking. The centuries ahead are filled with footsteps, not of armies, but of pilgrims, not marching in rows, but drifting alone or in pairs along dirt paths and forgotten tracks. They walked not to escape, but to arrive somewhere quiet, somewhere sacred, somewhere they had only heard about in stories murmured by candlelight. Pilgrimage was not always dramatic. There were no parades, no banners, just tired feet and quiet hope. Some walked to seek forgiveness, others walked because their neighbors did. A few walked because they had nothing better to do. A journey, after all, could give meaning to a life that had settled into too much sameness. Let's take a small detour to the path toward Santiago de Compostela. The sun rose slowly over the fields. The pilgrims carried small bags, a staff, and sometimes a shell. They stopped at shrines along the way. They ate broth from chipped bowls. At night they slept in barns, or under trees, or wherever the road paused. Some said they dreamed of saints. Others only dreamed of dry shoes. In England, pilgrims walked to Canterbury. They did not rush. They passed through villages, stopping at chapels with crooked walls and cracked windows. In one village, the priest gave each traveler a piece of cheese and a soft blessing. It was not much, but it became tradition. The cheese was usually stale. The blessing never changed. Still, the pilgrim smiled. Some pilgrims never made it far. They got lost, or turned back, or stayed at a shrine along the way and decided it was holy enough. There is a story of a man who meant to go to Rome, but stopped after 3 days and built a bench under an oak tree. He said he could feel the presence of Saint Bartholomew in the wind. He sat there for 40 years. The bench became a shrine. Let's pause and think of the shoes. Leather, worn thin, soles patched with thread and prayer. Some pilgrims walked barefoot, believing pain brought them closer to heaven. Others wrapped their feet in cloth. Blisters were common. So were songs. The kind sung softly to pass the miles. Some in Latin, some in no language at all, just humming. Waymarkers were carved along the path's simple stones, etched with crosses or arrows. One stone in Burgundy says only, "Turn here." It is unclear what it once pointed to, but pilgrims still turn there, out of habit, and the habit becomes part of the pilgrimage. A wrong turn shared by generations. Let's take another detour to a mountain pass in Switzerland. The snow falls gently. A chapel stands at the top, built by monks who once rescued travelers from storms. They kept dogs. The dogs became legendary, but the monks remained quiet. They served soup. They listened to stories. Then they waved people on their way. The path below is steep, but the air is soft. Pilgrims rarely traveled alone for long. A farmer joined a widow. A merchant joined a nun. A boy walked with a dog who wasn't his. Together they shared silence more than speech. They stopped when someone was tired. They waited when someone lost a sandal. No one was in charge. The road led them. At roadside shrines, people left small tokens: a stone, a ribbon, a single coin. One shrine contains nothing but wooden spoons. No one knows why, but the collection continues. A small sign says, "For Saint Felix, who helps the hungry." There is no record of such a saint, but the spoons keep coming. Let's pause beside a stream. A woman soaks her feet. Her name is not recorded, her journey unknown. She sings to herself, a song about Saint Margaret and a dragon. The lyrics make little sense, but the tune is peaceful. The stream flows beside her. It does not question, it only listens. The path to Rome was longer, more crowded. Inns along the way offered warm bread and cold beds. Some towns charged pilgrims a fee. Others offered blessings in exchange for prayers. A man once wrote that the holiest part of his journey was not Rome, but a quiet afternoon under a fig tree outside Florence. He never explained why. Miracles were rare, but stories were many. One traveler said his donkey wept during Mass. Another claimed a star followed him through fog. A third said a child appeared and gave him water, then vanished. These tales were shared around fires. No one asked for proof. Wonder does not need footnotes. Let's take a moment to visit a bridge outside a Spanish village. The locals say it was built by pilgrims who grew tired of fording the river. Each placed one stone before resting. It took a century. Now, people still cross it and leave a pebble on the side. They say it brings safe travel, or maybe just good balance. Pilgrims sometimes carried letters from their priests, notes of recommendation. A few carried relics, small ones, pieces of cloth, or salt. One carried a walnut said to contain the breath of Saint Jerome. It cracked along the way. He buried it beneath a tree. The tree, they say, now whispers in Latin. Let's pause again, beside a dusty road that leads nowhere in particular. A boy has lost his sandal. An old man helps him tie his foot with twine. Neither speaks. They walk on. Behind them, a chapel stands with no roof. Just a cross on one wall and weeds where pews once stood. Still, someone lit a candle there this morning. The journey was more than the destination. Most who reached the holy places felt relief more than revelation. They knelt, they whispered a prayer, then they ate a meal and rested their legs. A few stayed, most returned home, and their stories grew softer with time, worn down like the soles of their shoes. Let us rest here, on the side of a path. The sun is low, the air smells of dust and time. There are still 2 days to walk before the next town, but no one minds. The point was never arrival, it was the going, the walking, the small kindnesses, the blisters, the benches, the quiet. Soon, we will step into homes and hearths, into villages where belief hums like a lullaby. But for now, let us stay on the road, just a little longer. Let us step now, not into cathedrals or councils, but into kitchens, into cottages of stone and thatch, into places where history did not write itself in parchment, but in flower, ash, and whisper. Here, Christianity did not roar, it did not rule. It settled, it rested in corners, beside hearths and under eaves, where it became not doctrine but daily rhythm. The villagers of medieval Europe did not study theology, they lived it. They marked feast days not with banners, but with bread, crosses drawn in dough, butter set aside for saints. On St. Martin's Day, they shared goose when they could. On St. Annis's, they left bowls of water overnight to freeze into signs from heaven. Some found frost shaped like doves, others saw nothing and still believed. Let's take a small detour to a farmhouse in Burgundy. A woman rises before the sun. She lights a candle with yesterday's coal. She murmurs a prayer before opening the shutters. The words are not precise, they are not remembered in full, but she says them every morning, because that is what her mother did, and what her grandmother did before that. Faith, like bread, is passed down by hand. Children learned their first prayers not in church, but while watching their elders knead dough or gather herbs. A soft chant while brushing hair, a rhyme whispered before bed. Saint Joseph, guard my sleep. Saint Lucy, guard my dreams. Saint Blaise, keep my throat from harm. The names were said like lullabies, not explained, just trusted. The walls of many homes held small niches. A wooden cross, a saint's image, a candle stub, faded, smoky, unchanged for years. Some added sprigs of rosemary, others, bits of ribbon. These home altars were not fancy, they were familiar, and familiarity was its own kind of holiness. Let's pause to remember how villagers blessed things. Water before drinking, fields before sowing, goats before birthing. A mother would tie a red thread around her baby's wrist not because she read it in scripture, but because her neighbor said it kept away the evil eye. Whether it worked was not discussed. The thread stayed anyway. In the evenings, people gathered around low fires. They spoke of the saints not as distant figures, but as neighbors. Saint Christopher helped with crossing rivers. Saint Roch kept away plagues. Saint Anthony found lost things. He helped me find my comb, one woman said, so now I light a candle for him every Tuesday. No one questioned the logic. It worked for her. Let's take another detour to a cobbler's shop. He works slowly, stitching shoes by hand. Above his bench hangs a carved figure Saint Crispin, patron of shoemakers. The figure is dusty. Its paint has chipped. But every morning the cobbler nods to it and says, "Help me make good souls today." That is the extent of his liturgy. It is enough. Church bells rang in the distance, but the villagers often prayed before them. They prayed while plucking chickens, mending sleeves, or milking goats. Their psalms were out of order. Their creeds misremembered, but their prayers were sincere. And if they dozed off Ave Maria, the saints understood. They too had known long days. Some villages had a priest, others did not. When one came, mass was said in barns or under trees. Bread was broken, wine shared. If no priest was nearby, the people waited, or they prayed together without ceremony. A mother led the rosary. A grandfather recited a hymn from memory. They stumbled through the words. The rhythm mattered more than the accuracy. Let's pause in a kitchen where lentils boil. A woman drops in a pinch of salt and crosses herself. She does not know why. She only knows her aunt did the same. Beside her, a child traces a cross in spilled flour. These gestures, repeated often, became their own kind of scripture, written not in ink, but in motion. Feast days came with songs. Some were solemn, others were nearly jokes. A popular rhyme claimed St. Lawrence once turned cabbage into gold. The song had no theological merit, but it made the children laugh. And laughter, too, was holy, especially in seasons of thin harvests. Fasting was more common than feasting, not always by choice, but even this became spiritual. A bowl of thin soup was offered as a prayer. "This is for the poor souls in purgatory," one old man said every Friday. He didn't know who they were, but he believed they existed, and he hoped someone would one day do the same for him. Let's take a quiet walk through a village at dusk. Doors are closing, smoke curls from chimneys. Someone has drawn a white cross on a barn door with chalk. It's for protection, or perhaps it's just habit. Either way, the mark stays through the rain. No one wipes it off. Religious plays were performed in some towns, acted out by butchers, bakers, or shepherds. The lines were often forgotten, mid-scene, improvised. A child playing an angel once sneezed during the Annunciation. The crowd laughed, then applauded. It was still holy, maybe more so. Some saints were acclaimed by more than one village. Saint Hubert, for instance, protected both hunters and dogs. In one town, he was said to appear during thunderstorms. In another, during weddings. Both towns built chapels in his name. Both towns insisted theirs was correct. Neither was proven wrong. Let's pause near a field where a farmer places a loaf of bread on a stump. It's an offering to no one in particular. Perhaps Saint Isidore, patron of farmers, or perhaps just to the field itself. The birds eat it by morning, and the farmer says, "That's good. They needed it more." Daily faith was not dramatic. It did not demand clarity. It allowed for contradiction. A person might hang garlic and pray to Saint Michael in the same breath. They might fear witches and still light candles for angels. Their theology was not a system, it was a feeling, a slow pulse beneath the day's work. Let's take one final detour to a grandmother telling stories by firelight. She speaks of saints who wore shoes made of bread, of angels who whispered recipes, of prayers that cured toothaches and mended fences. The children listen, not for facts, but for comfort, and that is what they receive. We do not leave this world of everyday faith with an ending. There are no conclusions in daily life, only the return of familiar things, the smell of soup, the sound of bells, a candle flickering near the window. Soon, we will drift into the final part of this journey, but not yet. First, let us sit quietly and listen to the faded walls, still holding prayers to soft echo. Let us come now, not to the end, but to a quiet place near it, a place where the roads grow narrow and the pages thin, and the stories begin to forget themselves. We are not here for conclusions, only for stillness. We have followed the slow footsteps of saints, monks, scribes, and pilgrims, and now we pause to listen, not for meaning, but for memory, the kind that hums softly beneath the surface of time. The late medieval centuries did not announce themselves. They arrived with fog, as so many things did. The empires changed, borders shifted, kings were crowned, then buried, then forgotten. But the church remained not untouched but enduring, a familiar breath in unfamiliar air, a shape seen out of the corner of one's eye, too constant to be questioned. Let's take a small detour to a churchyard, where grass grows high between crooked stones. The names are worn away, the carvings faint, a bird sings nearby, not loudly. Inside the chapel, the paint has peeled, the altar cloth is frayed, a candle flickers in a niche no one dusts, and yet Mass is still said here, once a week. 3 villagers come. One stays after, just to sit. The Black Death came and went. It took many, too many. The prayers became shorter. The bells rang longer. Faith changed deeper for some, quieter for others. Some blamed, some wept. Some walked away. Others lit more candles than ever before. The churches echoed with emptiness and incense. But still, they remained open. Let's pause in a small cloister garden. A monk kneels weeding. He does not speak. He has not spoken in years. But his silence is not empty. It is shaped like a psalm. Around him, the wind moves through the hedges. A cat watches from a wall. Somewhere inside, another monk reads aloud to no one. The words drift out the window and vanish into the grass. The saints, too, began to fade. Not all at once. Some still had feast days. Others became footnotes. Their miracles grew smaller in the telling. A healing became a kindness. A vision became a dream. And eventually, no one remembered what exactly they had done. Only that they had once been needed. And now, they were simply present. Let's take another small detour to a bell tower with no bell. It cracked years ago and was never replaced. The villagers still gather beneath it on holy days, out of habit. The priest raises his hand and they pretend to hear the bell. The silence between them is enough. Some say they hear it anyway. Others don't mention it. Books piled up in monasteries. Some were never opened. A few had bookmarks that became brittle with time. One monk left a note in the back of a psalter. If you find this, know that I prayed for whoever reads it. No one ever signed their name. That wasn't the point. The prayer, like the book, was meant to last without being noticed. Let us rest near a well, a shallow one, covered in moss. They say St. Bridget blessed it, or maybe St. Clare, or maybe it was just a clear spring. People still drop coins in, some for luck, some for memory. Children throw in pebbles and make a wish, though no one remembers what's supposed to happen. The wish itself is enough. Everyday faith slowed further. Priests still walked muddy roads. Monks still lit candles in early dawn. Old women still rubbed salt across doorways and whispered names of saints like secrets. Even as towns grew and cities formed, and scholars wrote new theologies, these quiet practices continued, unnoticed and unchanged. Let's pause in a corner of a church no one uses. A broom leans against a pew. A spiderweb trembles in the light. Someone carved a name here 100 years ago. Just a first name. Perhaps to say I was here. Perhaps just because the wood was soft. The name is still visible. No one has ever sanded it away. Faith did not vanish. It changed its pace. It folded into habits. It lingered in doorways and fields and wooden beams. It hummed in lullabies. It lived in shadows and sunbeams, in the scent of wax, in the sound of pages turning, in the act of lighting a lamp for no other reason than that the night had come. Let's take a final detour, not to a shrine or a saint, but to a quiet lane in an unnamed village. A mother rocks a child. Her lips move, forming a hymn she barely remembers. A man sharpens a blade by firelight, then folds his hands in a prayer no one taught him. Somewhere, a group of girls gather flowers for a feast whose meaning they've forgotten, but they gather anyway. We do not end with a triumph, or with certainty. We end, instead, with a whisper, a sense of something that once was, and in a way, still is. The slow, soft persistence of belief, of memory, of stories half told, and prayers half heard. A faith not written in stone, but in rhythm, in repetition, in the way someone still lights a candle, even when no one's watching. And so, we drift, gently, not out of history, but deeper into it, into the long pause between words, the hush that follows a bell, the space between footsteps in the nave. This is where the forgotten tales rest, not gone, just sleeping, waiting to be remembered. Slowly. Let us leave them here, where they belong, in soft shadows, in still rooms, in the breath between prayers. There is no need to say goodbye. We have not left anything behind. It will all still be here, whenever you return. We'll continue again, another night. For now, just rest. The past is in no hurry. Good night, dear dreamer.